Hello, my name is Ryan and welcome to RWBY In-Depth Analysis. This week, to start us off, I will be analyzing where it all began, the Red trailer. The Red trailer, first released on November 5th, 2012, was the public's first introduction to RWBY. It was as much a tech demo and pitch as it was a trailer. At the time of its airing, there were many things about the show that hadn't yet been ironed out. RWBY's character design, as well as the design of the Grimm, were later changed. At the time, it wasn't even entirely decided whose grave RWBY was visiting. Ohm himself stated that RWBY's actions were out of character, but in retrospect, I think an argument can be made that it is in line with RWBY's future character. And in this analysis, I will be treating the trailer as canon, despite possibly having to squeeze it to fit in just a little bit. Made in just 2 weeks by Monty Ohm, and with music by Jeff Williams and his daughter Casey Lee Williams, the Red trailer really laid the foundations of what RWBY would become. The opening of the trailer establishes the setting and tone. The moon, shown as full, rose petals, and a dark, deep blue sky, desaturated. With the opening of RWBY's leitmotif, red like roses, the mood is mysterious and dark, haunting even. In front of RWBY is her mother's grave, stark whites and blacks broken only by the blood red of RWBY and her rose petals. Black, white, and red are of course colors commonly associated with death, night and decay, bone and blood. Details of RWBY's design, although later changed somewhat, also invoke symbolism of death. A cloak with a hood and crosses such as those used as gravestones. On the grave itself, we briefly see Summer Rose's name, making her, notably, the first named character in the entire show, followed by her rose symbol and the famous quote, "Thus kindly I scatter," which you may know is from the poem The Last Rose of Summer, from which her name is also taken. This poem is about loneliness, loss, and death, the tragedy of living on after losing what you love. All of this, of course, ties directly into RWBY as a character. I'll have more to say about this later on throughout this episode and this series. As RWBY strolls through the forest, the camera follows her from a distance, stalking from above like a predator following prey. We're watching a young girl walk alone through the woods, and this framing, along with the stark colors and thematic elements of death, evoke a sense of danger or peril, added to by the flashes of dark creatures following her. And of course, with the red hooded cloak, it's obvious from the very start that RWBY is an allusion to Little Red Riding Hood. In case anyone watching somehow doesn't know by now, basically every character in RWBY is an allusion to one or more characters from literature, whether that's fairy tales, children's stories, mythology, or even pop culture. These allusions affect everything from character design to story beats, and as such I'll be keeping track of them throughout the series, as not all are as obvious as they may seem. It's also worth noting that during this sequence we get a very short flash of what could be a crow or raven, something that carries a fair amount of significance as the show continues, thematically and to the story. RWBY exits the forest, only to be confronted by a horde of the dark, wolf-like creatures, Beowulfs, a very early design for them. As they attack, we get our first glimpse of RWBY's semblance, and our first good look at RWBY, set against the moon, something we'll see more of. We get to see RWBY's weapon, Crescent Rose, first in its rifle form and then as a scythe. It's worth noting that both of its forms are also very visceral symbols of death, one very classical and the other very modern. With it, we also get a subversion of Little Red Riding Hood. RWBY doesn't need a woodsman to rescue her from wolves, she can defend herself. The fight scene in the Red trailer is, of course, legendary. In addition to its awesome choreography, it introduces several concepts that are important throughout the show. The basic nature of the Grimm as vicious and violent, easy to kill but great in numbers, as well as that they evaporate when they die. The way RWBY propels herself with her weapon, and with it the underlying logic of how combat works in this world. And, in the climax, dust, in concept if not name. We also get a small peek at some character for RWBY. During the fight, she's largely unconcerned, smiling in the face of, not to overdo the point, death. But there's also hints of anger, something a little darker that comes out during the fight, like she's taking out her frustrations on them. Let's take a moment to talk a bit about the only 4 lines in Red Like Roses Part 1. Each line, obviously, refers to our 4 main characters, and tells us a little about them. RWBY is driven and constantly haunted by the loss of her mother. Weiss's distant and icy demeanor is due to her upbringing and the pressure from her father and her family name. Blake flees from violence and darkness, perhaps descending into uncertainty. Yang has more value and passion than first impressions might imply. Of course, none of these are particularly in-depth. After all, we've only met one of these characters. We'll be learning a lot more about them as we continue. One of the themes of RWBY is that there is always more to people than meets the eye. Now, earlier, I said I was going to try and squeeze this thing into canon. It doesn't have a lot of details to help with this. Firstly, there are a few things that simply don't fit, differences between the trailer and the show. Most obviously, the Beowulf's design, but also including trading the cross on RWBY's belt for a rose symbol, and, arguably, RWBY's level of skill. It's a little doubtful whether or not pre-Volume 1 RWBY would really be able to fight that many Beowulfs at once. Regardless, there are plenty of clues to help us fit this into the timeline of the show. To begin with, it's clearly winter. Given that the Huntsman Academies operate on a spring to autumn school year, and if you're skeptical of that, I'll be pointing out plenty of evidence pointing towards it over the course of this series. It's possible this takes place quite close to the start of the show. This could also be supported by the level of skill RWBY demonstrates, and the fact that she's wearing the same outfit. In that case, what occasion would RWBY have to visit her mother's grave only a few months before the start of the show? Before Beacon semester starts. My best guess is that it's because Yang will be leaving to attend. Remember, at this point RWBY wasn't going to be attending for another 2 years. Prior to the first episode of the show and her fateful encounter with Roman Torchwick, she expected to basically lose Yang for a long time. It's not hard to imagine her coping with this by visiting her mother more often. Alright, that's about all for this episode. There isn't all that much to talk about in a 3.5-minute fight scene with no dialogue, but I tried my best. Next week, I'll be covering the White trailer, our introduction to Weiss. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed and want to see more, consider subscribing. And remember, never stop moving forward.